Hi everyone, welcome back to Poetology. I'm Dan and this is my first video of the year, so Happy New Year! During the holiday I started watching Rings of Power and contrary to expectations and to the feedback I've received around me, I actually enjoyed it. And this put me back into full Tolkien mode, which is something I used to do every New Year with my siblings. We used to watch the integral of The Lord of the Rings for hours and hours. We either spread it over 3 different days or we binge watched it overnight on New Year's Day, which retrospectively was a little painful, but I do have good memories about that. And watching The Rings of Power just took me back. So in this video, I will show you all of my books on Tolkien that I bought for the most part when I was 18 and in the following few years, because that's when the first film came out in the cinemas. And after I watched the first film, I decided to read the trilogy, and it's one of the first big things I read in English. So the first one, I just remember not understanding very well, and over time I became better and better at it. I think by the end of the third book, I was able to understand most of what was going on. But in any case, then the films came out and I was able to test my knowledge against the films. So first I bought the trilogy of The Lord of the Rings, as I said. I had this edition that came out after the first film was in cinemas, and I loved reading this. I mean, I was young and impressionable. I enjoyed it a lot. I was fully immersed in that world for quite a while. I liked having all the details that the book allow that aren't all in the films, even though he's not my favorite writer for sure, but it's really enjoyable, really immersive. And the world he's created with all the maps and languages and cultures is pretty impressive, and I just loved getting into that. Now after that, I read The Hobbit as well, which was an easier read. And I haven't watched the Hobbit films at all yet. It's something I would like to do, so if you've watched them, let me know in the comments what you think, because I've heard bad things about them and that's why I haven't watched them. But now I'm thinking, actually, I might enjoy them. So let me know what you think. And I had this edition with illustrations that helped me get into it. It's a bit more childish, I would say, than The Lord of the Rings. It's definitely more accessible to a younger crowd, but even though I was a bit older, I enjoyed it a lot. I haven't reread it though, unlike The Lord of the Rings. I've never reread it. And at that point, I got books that were about Tolkien more than they were about The Lord of the Rings per se. And I was reading to Christmas for a few years, and I got this edition of Letters from Father Christmas, which, if you like illustrations, is really great. It has a lot of illustrations by the author. These are letters he wrote as Father Christmas to his children, impersonating Father Christmas and giving some news from the North Pole. And the letters are beautiful, the illustrations are beautiful. So it's kind of a fun book rather than a serious one, but I was very happy to read this. I'm really into maps as well. So I got a more serious book, the Atlas of Tolkien's Middle-earth, which is great if you want to look at all the places that characters from various narratives go and how they travel from one place to the other. And it goes from the first to the second to the third age. So it also gives you a big historical overview if you need to situate the narratives with a little more precision. It's more of an academic book, really, but fairly easy to read if you don't mind reading about fictional histories. I really like drawing and sketching, so I also ended up getting J.R.R. Tolkien, Artist and Illustrator, which shows his progress and journey as an artist, a visual artist, with all of the illustrations and sketches he took early on and how they developed over time to represent aspects of the narratives he was writing. So I think it's a really beautiful book if you're appealed to the more visual side of Tolkien's world, rather than just the sort of historical or linguistic or geographical world that Tolkien created. And it's a pleasure to flick through. I enjoy his sketches because, in a way, I can relate to them. I don't draw as well as he does, for sure, but he also started with fairly simple things and developed a style of his own, and I find it really encouraging to see how his art evolved over time and all the different things he tried and the illustrations he came up with for his fantastic world. And so then I watched The Rings of Power, and at first I didn't know it wasn't based on the Silmarillion, and I wanted to read the Silmarillion to get an idea of what came before The Lord of the Rings. So I got this book. I really like the edition I chose. It has really thin pages, it's quite beautiful but also portable, and so it takes you back to the beginning of the world. The first part is more of a creation narrative, followed by historical accounts that are a bit dry. So let's say it's a little boring for quite a while. You have to make it to 120 pages or so to actually get to more full-fledged narratives where you get a sense of story and you can remember characters. I mean, if you're like me, if you throw characters at me, I have no idea who they are, I forget about them immediately, and then when they show up again, I get confused. So that's what happened to me. Now I've reached the part of the book where it's much more enjoyable when you get actual stories. It's more like a series of short stories about different time periods than it is an overall arch. And then someone gave me this really beautiful edition. It's got these beautiful Elvish inscriptions here and comes with illustrations by the author as well. The paper is much thicker, so this one is better to have at home than to take with you everywhere, although I did take it with me on the train. It also has 2 maps that come with it, but I put them somewhere else and now I can't show them to you. Right, so to come back to the Rings of Power, what happens is that they didn't have the license to actually use the Silmarillion, so they've based their account of the Silmarillion on footnotes from The Lord of the Rings, for which they did have permission. And so what happens is that they have created a different narrative to fill in the gaps, and they have effectively created a competing narrative or just a separate story on the Silmarillion, loosely speaking, and other references as well. Now, this does not come as an issue for me. Like, I don't mind. I'm glad I know, because I thought it was based on the Silmarillion, and now I know that what I'm reading is not at all what I'm going to see in the series. My other thoughts on the series is that they've played it quite safe aesthetically. They've been very conservative by following up on what Peter Jackson created in terms of the environment of The Lord of the Rings. Landscapes look similar, characters wear similar clothing, so the style has stayed the same, which I think if it weren't the case, fans would be pretty angry. But I'm a little split between being so happy to be back in that environment and also wishing things had been slightly more inventive. But like overall, I think it's worth watching. You may or may not like it. As I said, it's not entirely based on Tolkien's texts, but I think creative renditions of various texts are good. I don't mind the fact that it's a different narrative. And I've just enjoyed dipping into this whole Tolkien world once more because it had been a long time. 20 years since I'd done that. I'm going to finish reading the Silmarillion and look forward to the second series and see if I still like it. Let me know if you like Tolkien and if you've read any of his books, and also what films you have or haven't watched and whether you liked them. And let me know about The Hobbit. Is it worth watching, yes or no? I look forward to seeing you in another video very soon. Bye!